Hello, bonjour, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. We'll talk today Leah Taylor-Roy from le Parti libéral, Monique Pauzé du Bloc québécois, Laurel Collins du NPD et Mike Morrice. We'll talk, replace Elizabeth May today in this press conference. Vous avez une petite période, j'imagine que chacun va parler un après l'autre. After that, we're going to have a question period. So let's begin.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a few words first. My name is Sean Katz. I'm here with Above Ground, which is an Ottawa-based project of Make Way. So thank you, first of all, to the members of the press for coming. Merci aux membres de la presse pour être venus. I'm going to say just a few words in English first, presenting the position of our organization on the issue of public support for fossil fuels, before I hand the microphone over to Leah here on my left. So Above Ground and over 100 civil society organizations have called on Canada to end all public financial support for fossil fuels. And this includes for technologies such as carbon capture that extend the use of fossil fuels. Above Ground is reiterating this call today. The government has recently made strides in this direction, notably by releasing strong guidelines in December 2022 to phase out public financing for fossil fuel projects located abroad. These are known as the Glasgow Guidelines. However, this plan only affects a very small portion of Canada's support for the sector, the vast bulk of which is provided for projects here in Canada. The government has pledged to phase out this domestic support as well, with a plan expected this fall. Our organization believes the government should move faster. We believe that the strongest and fastest way for the government to make good on its commitment is to simply expand the guidelines released in December 2022 so that they apply to projects located here in Canada. The benefit of these guidelines is that potential exceptions granted under the plan, including for carbon capture and fossil fuel-derived hydrogen, must meet a series of robust science-based conditions, including alignment with the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming limit. Given the current state of the science, it appears evident to us that if these conditions are indeed rigorously applied, it will prevent the overwhelming bulk of new support for the sector, including for these false climate solutions, as we refer to them. To ensure that the conditions are indeed applied rigorously, we are also urging the government to ensure greater transparency and accountability in the application of these guidelines, whether it be for support abroad or domestically. So I will limit my remarks to this. I will now pass the floor to MP Leah Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you for hosting this conversation this morning on the important topic of ending fossil fuel subsidies. I'd like to begin by saying that our government has done more than any other government to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it's in many different areas. In fact, the commitment to end fossil fuel subsidies that was made with the G20, Canada moved up by 2 years to 2023 instead of 2025. We also have one of the first methane strategies, the National Adaptation Strategy, the Clean Fuel Standard, and our Price on Pollution program. So we're trying to address not only the producers, but also the supply, but also the demand for fossil fuels, which we feel is very important. And this signature program, which gives Canadians, 8 out of 10 Canadians, more money back than they pay in the fuel charge, is also an incredibly important part of our push to fight emissions. So we are doing much work on many fronts. Our government is very ambitious on this. But as we learned this morning and in our discussions with other members and academics and activists, there is more that can be done. And we're open to those conversations. We need to keep the fight going, and we're committed to doing that. Thank you.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Je remercie, moi aussi, je joins ma voix à celle de Léa pour remercier Above Ground d'avoir tenu cette activité ce matin. Pour nous, je suis vice-présidente aussi du comité d'environnement de la Chambre des communes et on a tenu des réunions sur les subventions aux énergies fossiles. Et je vous dirais que c'était pas facile de trouver l'ensemble des subventions et ça ne l'est toujours pas. Mais on a eu un rapport là-dessus parce que on sait que le secteur des énergies fossiles participe au changement climatique, participe à l'exposition de tout le monde à ces changements climatiques-là qui viennent nous chercher par rapport à notre santé en particulier. Alors, je fais toujours ce lien entre les deux et les solutions mises de l'avant par le secteur des énergies fossiles, comme je pense particulièrement à la capture et le stockage de carbone, ne sont pas des solutions qui vont nous permettre d'atteindre les objectifs de Paris. Alors, cette étude-là, ça fait déjà 2 ans de ça. Nous en entreprenons une nouvelle bientôt qui est sur la finance parce que les institutions financières, les entreprises et tout ça, les choix qu'elles font d'investir, bien, ça contribue ou pas au changement climatique. Et actuellement, ce que les banques, ce que les institutions financières font, c'est de participer, encore une fois, à augmenter la pollution. Alors, juste un exemple, les 5 grandes banques canadiennes ont versé plus de 800 milliards de dollars à l'industrie des énergies fossiles depuis les accords de Paris. Ils ont financé à cette hauteur-là. Alors, soit qu'on prend l'argent des contribuables, puis on donne en subvention aux entreprises d'énergie fossile, puis de l'autre côté, eh bien, il y a l'argent des clients, les investissements des clients qui servent, encore une fois, aux entreprises d'énergie fossile. Alors, écoutez, ces entreprises-là sont déjà milliardaires, mais elles ont beaucoup trop de soutien. Elles doivent aligner leurs investissements, elles doivent aligner leur politique sur les accords de Paris. Merci.
Hello, my name is Laurel Collins. I am the MP for Victoria and the NDP Climate and Environment Change Critic. I want to acknowledge that we are on the homelands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples, and that when we're talking about eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, we also need to talk about the impacts of the climate crisis on Indigenous communities and how we need to invest in climate solutions and upholding Indigenous rights. You know, Canadians know that we are in a climate emergency. They are feeling the impacts. Wildfires have ravaged our country. It means that not only are communities evacuated from their homes, but just this week, a young child in Edmonton described breathing the air as, "It feels like an elephant is sitting on my chest." We are witnessing extreme weather, horrific pollution. This is our day-to-day life. Hundreds of people died in the heat domes in British Columbia. And we have a government who, the day after declaring a climate emergency, purchased the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which now costs taxpayers $34 billion. $34 billion, which could have been invested in real climate solutions. We also have a government that is handing over billions of dollars to carbon capture and storage. Risky, unproven technology that should be paid for by the companies who are making record profits, who should clean up their own pollution. CEOs of big oil and gas are making millions of dollars, while everyday Canadians are struggling to pay for their groceries, for their rent, where we are seeing the climate burn because these companies are fueling the climate crisis. We need a government that will implement a windfall tax on the excess profits that oil and gas are making. We need a government that is going to stop handing out billions of dollars to the companies that are responsible for the mess we're in. We need a government that will actually create the regulations to cap oil and gas, to bring down our emissions, and to invest in making life more affordable, in making our communities climate resilient, in creating the climate solutions that will bring us forward and create the good, clean jobs, the jobs of the future. This is the vision I see for Canada, and unfortunately, we have a government right now that delays, that breaks climate commitments. And then we have the Conservatives who deny that there is a crisis. Canadians shouldn't have to choose between delay and denial. We need a path forward that stops fossil fuel subsidies and that invests in real climate solutions. Thank you.
Well said, Laura. Really want to start by saying thank you to the Above Ground team for bringing together MPs from 4 different parties who at least are willing to have a conversation about what we must do, recognizing we are in a climate crisis. As Greens, we would push not only to, as you heard from the team at Above Ground, to end all public financing. Not just that we need to go faster, but we need to stop moving in the wrong direction. Future generations will look back at this moment in time and judge us based on the extent to which we recognize the crisis we are in. And if we are to recognize the crisis we are in, we have to not only move faster to end existing public financing for fossil fuels, but stop adding new ones. In fact, today, the finance minister is at committee talking about a bill that is implementing measures in the fall economic statement that include new financing for carbon capture, another subsidy to oil and gas to the tune that the parliamentary budget officer tells us is $5.7 billion. In addition to more funding going to the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The loan guarantees that were announced just this past fall are more new public subsidies going to oil and gas at a time when those same companies are in fact making record-breaking profits. The 5 largest alone making profits of $38 billion a year. We should be going the other direction. As opposed to the Government of Canada adding new subsidies to these oil and gas companies, we should absolutely be putting a windfall profit tax on their excess profits, which this government has already done when it comes to banks and life insurance companies. Along with the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, Greens have been calling to simply apply that same measure to oil and gas. If they did so, we could generate $4.2 billion to invest in proven climate solutions like the Greener Homes grants that currently folks in Ontario can no longer apply for and that should have been renewed months ago. Those are the funds we should be using to invest in proven climate solutions. I'm glad to be at a table with MPs who are willing to talk about how we move ahead as opposed to what we hear in the chamber often, which is how we fall further behind. Thank you.
Merci à vous cinq. We'll start the question period in the room. One question, one follow-up. Then we go online. And we'll start with Natasha, National Observer.
Hi. Yeah, Natasha Bolowski, Canada's National Observer. I was looking ahead to the fall when we can expect to see that framework to phase out domestic public financing for fossil fuels. I'd love to hear from all of you on what specifically needs to be included in that, because depending on how these things are worded, it can change the implementation. So, what are you keeping an eye out for when that's announced?
So I think Sean captured it really well, is that we have 2 models right now that the government has put forward. One, that they've applied to international fossil fuel subsidies, and that is a really strong model. It eliminated over $2 billion in fossil fuel subsidies internationally. It is something that I was at the table negotiating, pushing the government to do, and I'm actually proud of the framework that came out. It's not perfect, but it is a good pathway forward. Unfortunately, after that, we then were pushing them on the domestic framework. And what came out from the government was something riddled with loopholes, something that allows carbon capture and storage to continue allows the government to continue to hand out billions of dollars to big oil and gas companies as they make record profits. That is not the path forward. And so what I would like to see when it comes to public financing is let's move forward with a stringent framework that actually eliminates fossil fuel subsidies. Export Development Canada is right now, unfortunately, a huge contributor to global climate change, to Canada's disappointing record when it comes to fossil fuel subsidies. And we can do better. We have a pathway forward, so let's get it done.
Vas-y, Leah. Merci. I think that what we're doing is we have adopted the World Trade Organization, the WTO standard for the subsidies. The carbon capture program, which is meant to reduce emissions, is not just applied, obviously, to the oil and gas sector. It applies to all sectors across Canada. It is not a subsidy to that one sector. And we feel that it's important, as we're making the transition away from oil and gas, that we do everything we can to bring emissions down now. So we are working on eliminating the subsidies, but there are some exceptions that have been made to ensure that we can fight climate change now, because production will not end. It is not within our control. We have stringent caps on emissions, but the provinces control production. We do not. So we are doing what we can to ensure that while oil and gas is still being produced, that it's being produced in the best way possible and working to phase out through our cap on emissions.
Christopher, the energy mix. Oh, sorry. Oh, excuse-moi, Monique. Excuse-moi.
Oui, alors, juste à cette réponse là, de la fin des subventions, ce qu'on pourrait dénoncer, c'est de toujours mettre le petit tandem solution efficace, solution inefficace. Alors, si on parle d'une subvention efficace en pensant à la capture et stockage de carbone, non, ce n'est pas efficace ou inefficace. Je veux dire, ça ne fait que perpétuer la production. Et on sait que quand on brûle le pétrole, donc dans nos voitures ou quand on l'utilise, que ça génère le plus de gaz à effet de serre. Donc, le souhait que je peux émettre, c'est qu'on arrête de faire ce petit tandem-là d'efficace-inefficace et qu'on parle d'arrêt des subventions, carrément, là. Rien d'autre.
The framework will be successful when it ensures that public financing to fossil fuels goes down to zero. And currently, public financing to fossil fuels continue to go up. In fact, the framework allows for new subsidies to oil and gas companies who are extremely profitable already, to the tune of billions of dollars. The most recent record we have is $22 billion currently continuing to flow to the oil and gas industry. TMX pipeline alone is $2,200 per household across the country. The framework needs to ensure that that ends and that rather we invest in proven climate solutions instead.
I just want to say one thing about that, which it is that is not money that is being given to these companies. These are loan guarantees through EDC. These are not subsidies, direct subsidies. So just to be clear on that number.
The WTO cites loan guarantees as a fossil fuel subsidy. It's in the WTO.
Are we good? Yeah. David Turton, CBC.
Hi, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. I kind of wanted to change topics here. There was a report from the Canadian Climate Institute out today, and it says that industrial carbon pricing, not the consumer carbon pricing, is projected to be the top driver of emissions reductions in 2030. So it's the industrial carbon price, which is interesting because we're talking a lot about the carbon tax, the consumer carbon price. So I'm wondering what you make of that analysis that the industrial carbon pricing and sticking to that will be the bulk of our emission reductions. Maybe I could start with MP Collins, and if anyone else wants to add their thoughts to that.
I want to thank you for the question, and I think it's a really important topic. When we're looking at the current government's and presentation of carbon pricing, unfortunately, we have a system, the output-based pricing system, where there are huge loopholes, and companies like Suncor pay 14 times less than everyday Canadians. When we let big polluters off the hook, it means that everyday Canadians have to pick up the tab. It means that everyday Canadians are going to shoulder the burden. And so, I would like to see a situation where we actually make those biggest polluters pay more, that they could be actually driving down emissions, that our carbon pricing and making sure that the biggest polluters pay for their pollution could make a bigger part of our climate plan. Also, unfortunately, the Liberal government hasn't communicated their carbon pricing system very clearly to Canadians. They haven't been transparent about how this is actually driving down emissions. They've, bureaucrats have come to committee and said that its carbon pricing is going to make up a third of the emissions reduction plan, but we have yet to see, and we've asked many times for the modeling to ensure that that is the case. We could create a system that supported Canadians as they are struggling with the affordability crisis, with the cost of living crisis, one that makes sure that the biggest polluters are doing their part, that they're paying what they owe. And carbon pricing is an important piece of that, and I think the report from the Climate Institute points to that. But we could also be making sure that those biggest polluters are paying an excess profit tax, that they are regulated with a strong emissions cap on oil and gas, which we know the Liberals have put out an emissions cap that doesn't even meet their own weak climate targets. It's not even in alignment with the Paris Agreement. We need to pair good policy, like strong carbon pricing on the biggest polluters with strong regulations to ensure that we drive down those emissions.
I could just comment on that. I think the reason that it's showing that the large polluters will be paying the majority is because the program, the output-based program, is going to be asking and does ask large polluters to pay. The program, the fuel charge on consumers is necessary as well because we have to do everything we can right now. And we do have a program in place that ensures that people who are unable to afford to pay do not. They are getting rebates back through the Canada Climate Rebate, which more than compensate for what they're paying through the carbon charge. But I think that what's happening is that people aren't recognizing that the two things are working together. And there are some households that are going to pay more. Those are the households that have very large homes, that have several vehicles and only have 2 people in them. They will be paying more than they're getting back. But those households that are struggling, households who are taking public transit, households, the average household, they're getting back more than they're paying. So this is an affordability measure as well as a measure to reduce demand for fossil fuels. And certainly the projections are there, the estimates are there from the Environment Commissioner on that this will be a third. It is a third. It will be a third of our program of emissions reductions going forward. We can go into further analysis on that absolutely and show that. But the reality is that a price on pollution is recognized globally as the best, the most effective way to reduce emissions. It's a hard program to put in place because people don't like it, and that's why we have the rebate. That's why we are giving the money back to Canadians, especially those who are struggling to pay for everyday needs, such as homes or groceries.
Je vais juste rajouter que la taxe carbone ne s'applique pas au Québec, qui a la bourse du carbone depuis, ça a été négocié en 2011-2012, bourse du carbone avec la Californie, et que le prix a été établi jusqu'en 2030. Donc, il y a beaucoup de prévisibilité. Et au Québec, cette bourse du carbone n'a jamais, a toujours fait consensus. Là, ça n'a jamais été discuté pour dire non, on ne doit pas l'avoir. Alors, on n'est pas là.
Briefly to add, not only is it the case that there are rebates associated with the price on pollution, but we know that there are no rebates associated with the gouging of the oil and gas industry. So while the price on pollution goes up 2 or 3 cents a year, in the last year the profits of that industry at the pump per liter went up 18 cents a liter. If we were to really focus on affordability, we should be looking at what's really driving prices at the pumps, and it's gouging from the oil and gas industry at a time when the same CCI, the Canadian Climate Institute, made clear that Canadians are paying per household $720 in the last year as a result of climate-fueled extreme weather events. We need to be factoring that into the conversation in the House. Part of the reason we are not is because of the distorted way that folks are elected in this country through first past the post. It's also why we need electoral reform.
I just want to quickly add at the end of this, just to tie something I think that was present through all of the comments, is that we've heard a lot of misinformation from the Conservatives. They are touring in Quebec saying axe to tax when the carbon price doesn't apply in Quebec. They have a cap-and-trade system. They've been in communities in British Columbia when it was a conservative-leaning premier, Gordon Campbell, who put in carbon pricing in British Columbia. If you axe the federal carbon tax, it has no impact on either of those provinces. We've heard again and again misinformation from the Conservatives and lies, unfortunately. But we then have a government that has been really failing to communicate this policy properly and hasn't done the work to ensure that Canadians see the impact of climate policies, see a government that takes the climate crisis seriously. And so it's hard to trust the Liberals when they continue to break their climate promises. We need a strong climate policy that invests in Canadians, that makes their life more affordable, that makes life easier, because that's what climate solutions do. When you have energy efficiency in your home, when your home is less drafty, less cold, when you have a government that provides heat pumps to low and middle income Canadians, that makes a difference for them. When you create public transit infrastructure, that makes a difference for them. And we could be using the billions of dollars that is being handed out to big oil and gas companies to invest in those very climate solutions. We could be making oil and gas CEOs pay what they owe and putting that money into making life easier for Canadians.
I want to say one more thing. I'm not going to refute anything you said, Laurel, although I could, but I actually want to add to what you said about the pollution pricing program, because you mentioned BC and Quebec, which is true. They're not backstop provinces. But every province, all the premiers who are objecting to the price on pollution program, they can put their own programs in place. They only have the federal program because in Ontario, for example, when the Conservative government was elected, they eliminated the very good price on pollution program that was here in Ontario. And that's why they have the federal program right now. So any premier who is objecting to the program, please put your own program in place. It just has to meet the requirements that were laid out by the federal government, and which the Supreme Court of Canada said the federal government had the right to do, because we all know, well, we here all know that climate change is real and that it's something that doesn't respect borders. It goes across Canada, so every province in Canada needs to be fighting jointly. We can't have some that are doing nothing.
Can I just ask really quickly? It sounds like most of you don't agree with a lot of what the Conservative leader is saying when it comes to climate change. But is he right? Is the next election going to be an election based on carbon pricing and climate change? Is that going to be on the ballot? And do Canadians really need to think about that?
Yeah, I think Canadians need to think about more than that. What the Conservatives are trying to do is make this all about one issue. I think most Canadians realize that while the climate crisis is an existential issue and we have to address it, and we can always do more, and we are with the support of the colleagues, but that this is not only about climate. It exemplifies the choice. It's what kind of Canada do we want to have? And people have to take a step back and look at not only the behavior of the Conservative Party, not only what they're saying right now, because you can't trust most of it, quite frankly, but also what they've done in the past. And look at what their plans are. They have no plan to fight climate change. They have no plan to address affordability. They're stuck in the old mentality of trickle-down economics. Pierre Poilievre's favorite economist is Milton Friedman. And you can look at what that has done to other economies in other countries. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, they make a lot of promises, and they deliver nothing. And I think Canadians have to take a step back and not look at one issue, but look at the future of our country.
Moi, j'aimerais que ce soit sur le respect des compétences du Québec et des provinces. Alors, mais également dans ce même cadre sur aussi l'accès à la santé, l'accès au logement, enfin tout ce qui touche les citoyennes, les citoyens actuellement et qui fait que ça va pas bien. Mais je pense que si on respectait les compétences du Québec et des provinces, ben ça pourrait aller mieux.
I think Mr. Poilievre is saying what he often says, which is whatever it takes to accumulate more power. And in his view, a carbon tax election right now would do that. When I speak with people in my community every day, I hear about high cost of housing and how we need to address the housing crisis. I hear about concerns about future generations and addressing the climate crisis. I hear about concerns with mental health supports, and I hear about addressing poverty and ensuring that people with disabilities are lifted out of poverty. Those are the real concerns of people in my community, and it's my job to bring those concerns here. What you are hearing is a political party that is looking to bring their agenda and pretend that is the agenda of all Canadians.
You asked, about what the next election is going to be fought on, what are going to be the top issues, and I do think cost of living is going to be top of mind for Canadians. It is what people are struggling with right now. They are struggling to pay for their rent or their mortgage. They're struggling to afford groceries. They're struggling to afford medication. It is really hard. And when they hear Pierre Poilievre say, we're going to give you a break on something, we're going to cut this thing, they think, oh, okay, great, I need a break right now. I would love to have that cut on this tax. But what Canadians also know is that Conservatives cut services. They cut health care. They cut pharmacare. They cut dental care. They cut child care. Canadians lived through the Harper government where Pierre Poilievre was a minister, and they cut the things that people depend on. And when we are in a cost of living crisis, we need to support Canadians. We need to give them a hand up. And we also know that Canadians are feeling the impacts of the climate crisis. They have witnessed extreme weather, extreme flooding. You know, BC, Alberta are going through multi-year droughts, wildfire seasons that start in February. Just to bring it back to fossil fuel subsidies, we know that the Conservatives will continue to hand out billions of dollars to big oil and gas. We know that the reason they don't want pharmacare, the reason they don't want a strong emissions cap, the reason why they don't want to take on big grocery store chains is because those people, the lobbyists, the CEOs, are the Conservative base. The governing body of the Conservatives is made up 50% of lobbyists from these industries, lobbyists from real estate, lobbyists from oil and gas, lobbyists from pharmaceutical companies. That is who Pierre Poilievre is looking out for. Unfortunately, we have a government currently in power who similarly has to be pushed into doing the right thing when it comes to pharmacare, when it comes to climate action, continues to buy pipelines after declaring a climate emergency. But Pierre Poilievre is not looking out for everyday Canadians. He's looking out for rich oil and gas CEOs. He's looking out for the people at the very, very top. Canadians have just started to get a glimpse of Pierre Poilievre, but he is not who he says he is. All of us have witnessed him over the years in Parliament, and he is not someone who's going to take care of Canadians. He's going to take care of the CEOs who continue to rip people off.
Again, I just want to add one small thing. I agree with everything that's been said. I won't refute it. Well, perhaps not everything. But I would say the other line that's being fed to people right now is that the price on pollution is responsible for inflation. It's responsible for the high cost of living. And it's a very simple thing to put out there, but study after study from University of Calgary in Pierre Poilievre's home province came out and said it is not responsible for high food prices. It is not responsible for the high cost of living. You know, Mike just referenced that 18 cents at the pumps is due to the excess profits oil and gas companies are making. 2 cents. The increase in the price of pollution will be 2 cents at the pumps. This is not what has caused it. And they have this false narrative out there, and people are listening because they're anxious, they're upset. They see how hard things are right now. But the real programs we're putting in place are the programs that are going to help people. Cutting the price on pollution will not, because the people who need the help most are getting more back than they're paying, and that is not causing prices to go up. I won't go into details of all the studies, but anybody who wants to read behind the three-word phrase that's out in social media and read some of the articles that are out there will see that the economists, the Bank of Canada, and others have said that the most that it's contributing is 0.15% to our inflation. And we all see inflation has come down from 8.1% to now 2.7%. How does that happen when the price on pollution hasn't changed, if it's because of the price on pollution? Canadians just have to look a little bit further to actually understand what's going on and not listening to the lies and the slogans that the Conservatives continue to put out.
But do you know what does have an impact on inflation?
Corporate
greed.
And climate change.
And climate change is impacting our crops, and corporate greed has a huge impact on the price of gas at the gas pump, at the price of groceries at the grocery store, on the price of medication that people depend on. You know, we need a government that will actually tackle corporate greed. And unfortunately, we haven't had that for the past 8 years.
Well, we don't have any question online. If there's no more question in the room, so this is what concludes this press conference. Thank you to you all.
Thank you.
Always. It was a debate. Was it a debate?